Imagine being pregnant and getting a diagnosis for your unborn child that is just one of the last things that you would ever want to hear. A horrible message from the doctors that say your child will be born dying. Well, we have a special guest today who actually got that diagnosis years ago, and we have her story, which is a fantastic story, a touching story. It's not just a pro-life story, but it's a story about life, the difficulties that everyone faces, and how she and her husband approached it, the blessings that God had given her because of that. And there might be some, maybe a little angelic story involved in it too. You don't want to miss it today. Stick with us on Alabama Unfiltered. Welcome into the program today. This is Alabama Unfiltered. I am one of your hosts, Scott Beeson. Allison Sinclair is with me. Amy Beth Shaver is also here as usual. We have a great show for you today. Don't forget before we start that you can find this podcast at all the places that you usually look for podcasts, whether it's over at the Apple Store, over at Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Rumble now. Allison thinks we might be at Podbean, but that is a debate that we're having as the show begins.
In my head, we're on Podbean, so somebody look there.
Well, it's possible.
Thank you. Give
there.
us a thumbs up. And also, we're on somewhere new. You put us somewhere new, Allison.
Well, no, we were on Rumble. We just weren't getting much traffic there. But like a badge of honor, we're getting kicked off YouTube. So I think we should start.
Are we kicked off?
We're going to get kicked off again for today's show, by the way.
We have 2 strikes against us, and then we're like permanently banned.
If we actually tell people the truth, we'll be kicked off YouTube.
Well, guess what? We're going to get kicked off today because we're telling the truth.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we are powered by 1819 News. Please go to 1819news.com, sign up for all of their newsletters, and so you can stay up to date on what's going on with the state of Alabama. So, ladies, what are we doing? Where are we going? How are y'all?
What? We are good. How are you?
Hot. Temperature hot.
Driving around with the top down?
No. It's way too hot for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the air on, but it's like 198 degrees in Birmingham.
At least.
Other than that, I'm good.
Is it, they give that feels like temperature. Why do they even bother with that?
Because they want to make it sound worse.
Feels like
You're
hell.
going to make... It's 2 degrees hotter. 2 degrees cooler. That's why they do it, though, isn't it? So you think it's super, super, super hot?
Yes.
So
yeah, stay inside.
All right, before we get started.
Yes.
Did anybody do anything at the World Games? Did y'all go to any World
Zero.
Games? None?
Here's the deal. It took me
We had a
2
show
whole
about
weeks.
supporting women's sports.
I know.
And the 2 women on this show went to nothing, and I went to the women's softball
supported by watching
game,
the opening games.
chanted USA. You only did it for like whoever did the concert or something.
No one told me that they were all of the sports that were not in the Olympics.
What
Did you
think
know
it
that?
was?
I knew that.
I had no
What do you
idea
think
what it was. I just knew we were doing things.
Just a bunch of people. There's
Well, I
blocking
knew
traffic.
we were playing games. It was good. And they were, like softball and like rollerblading and sumo
Parkour.
wrestling.
I would have loved to have seen parkour.
Chris wanted to go. We
What is
really
parkour?
didn't have time.
Have you never watched The
I went
Office?
to a game. Don't give me the what's the Office? No, I know what the Office is, but what is
Sorry, I
parkour?
just slammed the table. Parkour is like when you bounce off, like you run and you jump and you like climb the wall and then you jump to that wall and then you jump on the desk and then it's bouncing around.
So I've seen that
and
like
it
on
would have
YouTube
Yeah,
or
you've seen it.
I
Rumble.
don't know why I think of like
Right.
Dwight and Michael on The Office doing parkour.
Well, I went to the women's softball game and chanted
Good for
USA,
you.
USA, and we beat Japan, and it was fantastic. I was a patriot. I don't know what y'all were doing.
I was out of town.
I was
Remember?
cheering from my
I
heart.
remember
I was-
where you were.
I was
In my heart.
And
I
you
was
were cheering in your heart. So what do we have today? Now that we've rounded up the World Games, that I'm the only supporter of the local economy and the country.
We have a great show. And in fact, in light of Roe's reversal, we have a story, and we have a guest who is my ride or die, is one of my very best friends in the world. And in order to tell the story, I'll start with the story and let her jump in. But imagine that you get the worst kind of news early on in a pregnancy. And then, though, you decide that you are going to let the Lord write your story. My precious friend, Holly, is here today. And can you imagine driving to Tampa, Florida with your friend and you are, how many weeks pregnant were you, Holly?
I think I told the physician I wasn't feeling any pain. I was around 36, 37. I think I may have flubbed a little just so I could do a road trip with you. But yes, I was in the last couple weeks.
And we drove from Charleston with newborn Wesley Catherine. Yep. She was 4 weeks old and screamed the entire time. But you, however, had your feet up on the dash, up and back. You were having Braxton Hicks, and you tried to keep that from me. And you looked like any other beautiful pregnant girl, except you have a different story. What happened?
So thanks for leading off, and thanks for having me here, Scott and Allison. And of course, Amy Beth, this is just awesome to be able to talk with you today and just kind of tell our story. And that really encapsulates, I feel, what is happening in the U.S. right now, especially with Roe v. Wade, is that it would be 21 years ago. Just May, we had our daughter Grace, and her story is still being told. So thank you, Amy Beth, for having me on here. But do you want me to start when we were diagnosed? Is that where you want me to start with this, or do you want me to?
Well, yeah. What happened? We were pregnant at the same time. We were excited at the same time. Can you imagine, like, when you were having your babies and it's just, you're thrilled, first child, coming out of a career in pharmaceuticals, right? You're a military family. By now, to this date, you guys have moved how many countries have you lived in? A lot.
Well, we've lived in, we've done 18 homes. I've counted that up.
Wow.
We've done 14 moves and 5 overseas. But going back to, the story that you've kind of unfolded is that we were on our first child. You had Emmy, and then you had baby Wesley just a couple months, I think in March, and our daughter Grace was going to be born in May. And I was carrying a child that had a diagnosis of trisomy 18. So that's what was diagnosed. If you go back to your story of being diagnosed with a child that the medical community deems as born dying. That's the terminology for a child like that. So it was our first. I was 28 years old, having never had a child before, and this was all new and exciting. And like you said, I was pregnant just like everybody else, but yet I had this this crazy landscape in front of me that was unlike other people who were pregnant, like you were with Wesley. You got to do the room, you got to tell everyone about your baby, you got to pick a name, and you got to be excited for what was to come. And for me, I had to find the joy, and I know we talk about this a little bit prior to the show, I had to find the joy in God's plan more than the boots on the ground issues with being pregnant, because I could not choose. I couldn't make a room. I could not celebrate and have a shower. I could not pick a name, and I was picking out hospice care and also a gravestone for my daughter, not knowing how long she would live or if she would live at all. So that was kind of the beginning stages or the ending stages of what we were going through at the time that you talked about in Tampa. We were diagnosed, if we roll back to December, right before Christmas. And they said, no, it's probably nothing. You do the testing. And then within about 4 days prior to Christmas, I got a phone call from the physician that said, well, you have one of two things. Your child either has trisomy 18 or they have Down syndrome. One, they're going to die. The other one, you have to prepare for what Down syndrome brings. And so we lived probably through New Year's when I was able to come back to Charleston. I was with my husband. He's in the military, and we were away for Christmas. So in January is when I really started to dive deep into what it meant, what a child meant, and whose it was. Mm-hmm. And Grace was God's.
So for listeners that don't know, what is trisomy 18?
So trisomy 18, very layman's. You can layman's terms is there's the chromosomes on the 18th chromosome, so trisomy 18. There's one too many. There's one too many chromosomes. So every single cell in the body is incorrect. So when fertilization happens and you have all the dividing of cells and all of that, the body is then formed, but every cell of the body now has an extra chromosome on it, which creates enormous amounts of confusion within the body as it's being formed, as well as an inability ultimately when they are born to be able to breathe on their own, swallow on their own, mostly because there's a lot of brain damage. And so ultimately that's what is the demise of these children, is that the brain is unable to tell the heart to beat and the lungs to breathe and all that. So early on, I actually was telling Amy Beth with this Roe v. Wade, I was watching CNN the other night, and as we do, we try to watch all actually, and try to, take all the news outlets and put it all together. But CNN is now pivoting, I notice, on the Roe v. Wade. They focused on a family that had a child with a lethal condition. And, and they were just spotlighting how just horrible this was, that, she wasn't able to terminate this child. And again, that's a choice. I did counsel, my background now has been to counsel a lot of these women and have compassion and recognize and kind of dive deep into where they are as a person, right? Because ultimately that is very important to God, and therefore it's important to me as I counsel them. But that, that's becoming their new pivot, is that, it's not about the child and the baby. It's about telling these very heart-wrenching stories that, of course, every person, to include myself, watches the newscast and thinks, oh my goodness, this is devastating. This is a horrible condition. But yet for me, the story for me is being able to see how, I had to say whose child this was. And as a believer, I believe God is the author and the creator and the giver of life. He's the beginning and the end. So for me, once I recognized whose that baby's was, the path forward to me and the joy of seeing this situation play out became larger than her syndrome and how this was all going to play out, and the decisions that we had to make, because it was advised that we terminate the child. So, yeah.
How quickly, Holly, remind me, after the diagnosis of trisomy, and that's also the same, is that the same as Turner's syndrome? Or is trisomy separate?
So Turner's is trisomy 13. So,
okay.
Yeah, so it's actually a little worse.
Okay.
So, in the gradient of worse, kind of making light of it. Downs, if there's a gradient of genetic conditions, and Downs is trisomy 24, I believe. And so beyond that, as you move down in numbers, it becomes much more severe. Okay. So 18, trisomy 18 is worse than Downs, and then Turner's is even more, as far as severity goes.
And so they jumped in, and I remember, because you came home from an appointment and they had advised you, how long after they said we recommend termination before you guys had to tell them? Did you tell them immediately? Did you wait? Like, what was that process like?
Well, and I just want to caveat on this before I dive in, is that this is our story. And I do believe that God does have a story for everybody, in stories of keeping the baby, and also if they do abort the baby. I think that he can restore a lot of things. So I just want to caveat on that, because there were women that then I counseled afterwards who literally did not have the support, nor the knowledge base, nor the church. And man, the decisions that they then made are hard, right? And this was hard for us, as you talk about our decision. We didn't take it lightly. Like they didn't give us the diagnosis, Beth, and we just sat there and thought, praise Jesus, praise Jesus. I'm immediately, we're keeping that baby. I think we sat for a long time and said, man, this is tough, right? This is tough. This is real. This is feeling and real. And and what does God want us to do? And so I think I told you the story. So tell me if you need to, if can I tell the story a little bit of,
sure.
of how we made the decision? Is it okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, it's right before Christmas, and I'm sitting there thinking, and my background is actually in biology of a STEM major. And so, of course, a lot of that is swirling around. We're in a Bible study that then Amy Beth is part of that has a lot of physicians. So we're asking a lot of questions. So that's what we did once we left the facility, trying to just say, what is this, first of all? Is God just going to heal this? I mean, that's what we wanted, right? With immediate healing. Okay. And so that's a whole thing too, right? As a believer, like, can God do it? And is he going to? And what if he doesn't? I mean, that's a whole thing there. Probably another show, frankly. But then I think that we sat and said, okay, we don't know. And so, but we do know that that God has a path for us. So there's a song by Amy Grant called Breath of Heaven. And it says, breath of heaven, light my darkness, come over me, your holiness, breath of heaven. She basically was saying, I don't know what to do. And it came from Luke, where she is saying, God, this is crazy, right? What is happening? I'm pregnant. I don't like the situation. I don't really, frankly, probably want this situation. But ultimately, she said, I'm your servant, right? And so I think from Luke, that was the springboard for my spouse and I to say, okay, we foundationally are believers. We know God is bigger than this. This is his child. We are just going to walk in faith and say, we are your servant. So from that starting place then is where we made decisions, even when we dealt with the medical community. So we were educated, we were wise to speak with, your husband, and then others who God had just was constantly putting in our path in the Orb of Charleston, which is really, again, so looking back, how gracious was he, knowing that it was coming.
Wow. So after that happened, and after you guys told them, you have a couple really good quotes. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but you said there was a reason that you gave to me as to why you guys chose life. And then I want to jump after that to what happened in the hospital, because that story is remarkable, I believe. But you said that, I'm trying to find the quote, but talk to me about that time, about the decision that you made, because some of the women you counsel, here we go. Some of the women that you counsel don't have support. But then you also said that as pro-lifers, we have to be the community of people who sympathize, meet them in their time of need. Expand on that a little bit for women who are literally in crisis.
Well, I think this goes back to as I'm getting older, and I have teenage girls of my own, right? And we all are, I recognize that that's also a platform that God, has given me, that the blessing continues as I'm able to now use Grace and her ability to change actually a healthcare system and the way the whole MUSC dealt with lethal children and their families. That is a story that is still being told, not only to my children, but also here on this radio show. So recognizing that is, that the decisions that we make 20, 30 years ago, God still uses, right? That's the story, right? That is, using things for his glory. But I really think that after we had Grace, that the part of the point is that it's a hard decision. And there are so many for all of us, sitting here and around the globe. Life is not, easy, right? And there are hard choices, and life can be hard. And so, and my story, it's going to be hard whether you keep the child, right? And it's going to be really hard for you if you abort it. It's just, which one are you choosing, and which one has long-term effects with the hope that you are not regretful when you can speak about it. And that really, I know that sounds very basic, but at the core, I thought, I want to do this right so that later, as I tell my friends and I tell my children, because we at that point knew we had genetic testing done and we could have more children, that I want to speak with confidence and give the glory to God that look what he has done, without saying, I don't know if she felt pain. I don't know if she, and I just feel in my heart still a huge hole that I don't know when I meet Grace in heaven, is she going to say, why didn't you love me a little bit? You're right. That it was hard for me. It was hard for me. And so that gets kind of deep, actually. But those are the things that are real, that as you make these decisions, you think, where do I want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? I know that God is not giving me the path or the magic envelope to show me what to do, but I know what he is saying, which is put your faith in me. It's a blind faith. It's a shadow step, but I will provide. So I can see that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask what kind of, because so many women or the women who face this kind of situation, and the whole family does. But what kind of pressure is there from the medical community, the doctors? I mean, at that time, did you feel like they were leaning towards, hey, you need to end this pregnancy, that kind of thing? Because people look to their medical professionals as the experts, and then later on they may think, well, why did I listen to them? They don't. So how was that in your situation?
Yeah, well, you know what? That's a great question, Scott. I mean, I'll tell you that, I think I am so thankful and really quite humbled that God, equipped my spouse and I to have good counsel. I mean, I will tell you that, and I know from counseling other women who are in a situation where they're like, either the child is, lethal, or they're in a bad spot, right? That they don't have that. And so an abortion is a Band-Aid. I mean, I will just say that loud and clear. It is a Band-Aid for the situation. And that's whether it's a child like ours, Grace, or it's a pregnancy that you didn't plan on, is that it's really just to, get you to the next step, right? But the reality is then at the next step, where are you mentally? And I think mental health is a huge part of this, actually. And it became a huge goal of mine as we kept the baby, that I would feel mentally secure and solid in the choices that I was making for later, so that I, whatever life was bringing, that I felt certain of where my child was, and was she loved, and did she know that her parents loved her and she was worthy, and that she was, that she was made, by God. Now I know that not everyone's a believer, but I also know that there are lots of reasons on the mental health side for when these women get abortions, that, they still have all the hormones, and they still get put in the wheelchair, and they still get wheeled out, and they still feel bad, and they still have life to go back to, and they still, have to go to work and think through what just happened. They know it was alive. I mean, right? I mean, we know. I mean, that is the biggest lie. And that is the narrative that is not being put out there, is that in essence, it really is just oppressive for women, but you just can't see it. That is the whole side of abortion that is really quite ugly, and I think, frankly, oppressing, is that there is an aftermath. There is an aftermath. And for me, when I would counsel these women, I would say, it is going to be hard now, this situation is hard, or it's going to be hard later. So if you choose abortion, just know what you are walking into. And I think that is the lie that the people of the pro-life, orb are not giving. And that's oppressive to women. And I think they frankly would be shocked to hear me say that, because, they are fitting it as women, uplifting to women. But the reality is these women are just living in internal pain. They are. And it's a lie to say that they're not.
Well, let me ask y'all, as y'all are all ladies, apparently, regardless of what half the people in the country say. Because I look at the pro-choice community, I look at the response that's happening in Roe v. Wade, and it's astounding to me. Some of the women, I'm trying to be respectful, screaming, crazy,
Crazy.
almost possessed, just so much anger. And I've thought, and that's why I'm asking ladies, that it's a mental health issue dealing with maybe something they did, maybe they had an abortion, whatever, and it's just taking its toll. I mean, is that part of what is going on? I know some of them haven't and they're young and they're just taking part in the marches, but I think that's got to be part of the anger of like, don't you, I can do it, don't tell me. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you counsel and Holly, you as well. These women, probably more. I have 2 adopted children, but I don't interact with the mothers as much.
Yeah.
But I would think part of it is just the shame coming out, and that you have to defend your actions. You have to at all costs. I would say to some extent, so you can sleep at night, and you can go on with life. I'm guessing that's a lot of it.
I would agree. I think that there's so much hurt. I think we, for example, when I ran for office and we put up our pro-life ad and we told the story of one of our kids asking what would happen if you didn't have me, and then erasing the family tree, we got such hate from people, but it was more from men than it was from women.
That's so interesting.
It's very interesting. And so I really believe, if we consider the heart of man, that for that moment they were convicted over what they did. And women as well. I was banned from reading the comments, but I was told that the vicious comments were coming from men. But I do believe that they're convicted over that. They do understand what they're doing. And like Holly said, it is a Band-Aid, because when we seek to take this into our own hands, planned or not, what we're doing is we're eliminating the grace of God. And we're saying, my situation is so bad, whether it's a baby with a born dying diagnosis, or I just don't want it.
Right. We
are eliminating God's grace from the situation instead of saying, this isn't what I planned, but I need some help. And that's though what we feel and what we're hearing from these women. And the good news is, on the flip side though, when we see the anger, we contrast that with all the work that's going on in the pro-life community and the 2,700 centers and the hundreds of thousands of, actually millions of dollars raised, gifts given to these babies, the support that really is there.
Right.
But because of the common narrative, they're not hearing it. Like Holly said, the narrative is that we're horrible. We want to repress women. We hate women. Nothing could be further from the truth. But I don't know.
And I really think well, I was going to say, it's a human rights. The more you get on there, I mean, it's human rights. I mean, they're human, and right. And so, you get on there, whether it's like having empathy for the unborn, right? Whether it's, you see them, with children just, getting the school shootings. I mean, whether it's end of life issues, whether it's, global issues and poverty. I mean, all of those, right, are human rights. God loves humans who he made and created in his image. And so there's a part of me that I believe it's a human rights issue, because they are human. And so all these rabbit holes that they are taking us down, and you've named quite a few of them, right? And it's all garbed in, lifting up women. It's just a smokescreen, right? For let's just acknowledge that that's a human being. And it kind of blows my mind that they then can't say, as they are very human rights, pro human rights, right? As AOC and all these, Democratic senators and congressmen. Why are they not then saying, but wait a minute, we're not protecting these humans? I mean, like, if you are so human rights, it just blows my mind that this is not seen in that same circle of human. We need to protect humans. They are precious and they are made. And I think it's just so easy to get into these smokescreen issues, and they see this side, the pro-life is not a human rights issue. And I would completely disagree with that. Completely.
Well, I think that's the crux of the issue. And really, I don't know how you come to agreement or any way forward together, because the other side does not see an unborn child in the womb as a human. And if you can't agree on that,
Right.
you never really end up in the same place, which causes us to have to stand up and speak louder and lobby on those children more so, and to be willing to talk about the stories of, and I think as believers, it's easy for me to say this, and I've developed into this in my relationship with God, but I go back to whatever it is when my mom was dying of brain cancer and it was awful. But you go, okay, God is still sovereign. God is either sovereign or he's not.
Right. There's no in
And we
between.
don't get to pick and choose when he is or when he isn't just because we don't like what's happening. And there's a lot of comfort in that. A lot of people are really offended when you say that.
Yes.
But there's a lot of comfort in knowing that God is the maker and the keeper of life. And that informs your decision. And I'm sure you look back and wonder, but you made the decision and you can rest well in that because it wasn't up to you.
Yeah.
So courage,
right.
I want to hear what happened in the hospital and what it was like when you got to hold your baby girl. And
Well, before we get there, what did the doctors recommend? I'm kind of missing a step here.
They recommended abortion.
They recommended
No,
abortion. And
they recommend. No, yeah, they recommended abortion. I mean, it was because because at the time at a medical university of South Carolina where I was delivering, they had not seen there had not been one born, and that was in
Wow.
2001.
Mm-hmm.
that's
So
shocking.
that became a whole different issue as far as getting what they were going to do with her once she was born. So when I say that it changed a healthcare system, I think that going back to human rights, you're saying what makes a person, what makes a history maker in this world, what are we doing on this earth and leaving it as a better place? You realize there's a child that lived most of her life in utero and 12 hours out, and she changed a healthcare system.
Wow.
So those are the things that are powerful moments for each person. Is I'm sure you have them with your mom, Allison, and Amy Beth. Clearly, I know your story and all the intricacies of the stories that we hold dear, to ourselves. That you think, especially as a believer, that there is a hope that God is using it for good, right? And so he doesn't have to show us, but I will say in his graciousness, we were able to see as we made the decision to keep her, and we walked the university through how to handle a lethal child, how to handle it at a teaching hospital where we didn't want her, unnecessarily poked or prodded because we didn't know how much time. I mean, all these different things that we had to do, and then the way that I think that you will understand as believers, and it's my hope for women who then seek Christ first and foremost. That's more important than any of this, and then they are able to walk in faith somehow in their life and see God's goodness. But at the end of delivering her, she was lived for 12 hours. But as she passed, the two physicians who signed off on her death certificate were part of the Bible study that Amy Beth and I were part of, and Christian believers. And both of those women, Sarah and Tina, then were there and signed off as just part of God just wrapping his arms around us.
So, Holly, how about the time when she was delivered and she lived? And then you had made a request, but somebody went to get some food. You took a shower. Walk us through that.
So these are the things that when I counsel, Scott, you were asking about what they advised, and I don't know if you remember the prayer of Jabez.
Yes.
Remember that came
Yeah.
out. Okay, that came out about this time. And so you're going to see the salty side of me, but I will tell you what, when that thing came out, when Grace was being born, and the whole thing was, please expand my territory. And I remember thinking, dear Jesus, there's no way that I am praying that at this point in my life, because I'm kind of at capacity, right? Do you remember the whole book was like, hey, just pray and expand me. And I was thinking, oh, Jesus, I'm kind of, I think I'm
anymore.
I think I'm,
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think I'm done. I'm not going to ask for any more. I think I'm not asking for any more right now. But anyway, so going back, they had advised, and what I think my point with that is I'm not advocating for hard things. I think sometimes, it feels like, well, hey, just bring it on. And, the reality is I didn't want that, right? I didn't ask for this, and in keeping her, I wasn't asking to make, on purpose, make myself and become a martyr and, just woe is me. It really was about who is getting the glory in the situation, whose child it was. And it was not mine. And so in that, we had to make all these plans in the hospital, and some of it was the do not resuscitate. So, this is, I think, I know there's been articles that have been written about this, and, I know there's different points of view. And I think that I would say within that if I give a lot of grace towards people who are truly trying to seek God's face. I really do. We lived all over the world, and I do think it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and maybe not necessarily how I would do it, but we put on a do not resuscitate for her. And most of it was because we didn't feel like we were going to take any extraordinary means, and that would even be shots. That would even be, that we'd give her food and water, but we were not going to resuscitate her and prolong her through, extraordinary means so that she would just be in pain. That was our path towards however long God was going to have her here, that we were going to make her comfortable, but we were not going to take, crazy means to that end. So she was very comfortable. So she started labor breathing about 11 hours into it. So we, and I think she was throwing up some of the water because she couldn't breathe correctly or eat correctly. She was aspirating. So one of the nurses took her out and wanted to clean her up a little bit. Well, as she walked out of the hallway, and we said, please don't take her out. Please don't take her out. But again, we're tired, as you can imagine, having children. We were, many hours into this and kind of seeing blurry, I think. But they took her out, and she did crash. She did crash, and we didn't know it. And there was do not resuscitate on all the doors, on everything she was a part of. And we just wanted her to pass peacefully. Well, they left, and she crashed. And so within about 5 minutes, and I'm piecing this futuristically, putting all the pieces together so we knew what happened. But the nurse took her out. She crashed. Another nurse who brought her in and said, here's your baby. And we didn't know she had crashed. And within about probably 5 minutes, she did die. And that nurse left. Well, about 10 minutes later, they came in to come get her. And the nurse said, hey, how did you get your baby back? And we said, well, the nurse brought her back in. She goes, no. I took her out and she crashed. How is the baby back in here? Well, our two friends who then signed the death certificate said that basically the child had crashed, and there was a nurse that they have no record of. They have no vision on, and it was the one, they can describe her, but it was the one that brought her back into the room and gave Grace back to us alive. And then we had about 5 minutes with her before she died. And so from my perspective,
wow.
that to me, that means there was a God in his graciousness allowed
wow.
something not of this world to bring her back to us so that we could say goodbye.
Wow.
Amen.
What a gift.
Yeah, that's a little more than I can take.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't expand my boundaries or expand my boundaries right now.
I mean,
we'll wait a little while longer on that. That is an amazing story, but that's what, God can do what he wants to do.
God can do what he wants to do. And that's what happens in the middle of excruciating pain and suffering, is that he does things like that. Holly.
Well, let me ask one quick question.
Yeah.
How much did that, when you found that out and kind of realized that, that had to help in the entire process? God is with you, God is for us, but just having an extraordinary situation like that on top of an extraordinary situation has got to be a real blessing.
Yeah. You know what it is? And I will just tell you, all of you, again, and I feel like, this is a little bit about me, but it's really not. It's really about how we all have a story, and I really, those who have one know what that is, right? They know that mountaintop where they've had to come to a crossroad and say, okay, who's getting the glory in this? He is greater than I, right? It's the 2 Corinthians 12:9, which is, your grace is sufficient for me. And I will be made be made powerful in weakness. And so those times, as you talk about the aftermath, those are really the times that I think is the sweetness of a hard situation, and really then the refining of a person's faith, and the refinement of what you really believe God can do, not only for yourself, but for others. So I think that then my passion for these young ladies, and frankly, my teenage daughters and my son and their peers, is that I want them to know the goodness of what God can do. It's not, don't do the flippant Band-Aid, right? Because the reality is that does not allow the fullness of what God is going to do for you. And the plans that he has for these children.
Right.
And so I think that is precious. And I think that narrative is getting lost on this generation, that there's these flippant statements, and there's how many political issues that, just the flip of a 3-letter sentence that they say is really it doesn't justify what God is probably going to do in that situation, the sweetness of how he's going to refine them as individuals and really work in their lives long term. And I would say that I would never say I would want this, because I think that that's just truth.
Right.
But I do believe that I'm a better parent. I believe I'm a more compassionate individual, no matter the choices that are made. I believe I'm a better friend. I believe I'm a better listener. And I also think I'm a truer believer in God's plan, and not because I like them all, but because I believe he is good and he will follow it to completion.
Amen.
Wow.
Well said.
I mean, what do you say after that?
I don't know. That's so good. It's just
We had
such
church
a
today.
great- yeah, I feel like it's just such a powerful reminder that it really doesn't matter if it's 12 hours or 12 years or 120 years. Like, God uses every life. And I think about my 2 kids, or sweet Amy Beth. Okay, I'm going to cry. When I said sweet Amy Beth. Oh,
No, I'm going to cry.
Okay.
Don't look at me.
like if their lives, if Grace's life had never been here. I mean, think about that little girl for 12 hours and the 9 months before potentially changed so many lives and the trajectory of so many families just from your story and being able to minister to these other moms and parents that are going through something like this. And it's really impactful. And I feel like we're so caught up in the next big dumpster fire out in the world. Like, stop and think that, like, God is ordering all of this all the time, whatever it is. And it's overwhelming, and I'm going to cry. And so now I'm just going to stop talking.
Well,
It's good.
It is so good.
It's
And I
good.
think in God's economy, watching this story as a young mom and watching their family go through this, it changes a person, because you think, I cannot believe, you're pro-life, and that as an adopted person, this is very sensitive. But like Holly says, you also have extreme compassion on the women who think that's their only option, and it's not.
That's right.
But in God's economy and in his world, we have to take seriously the admonition that in this world you will have trouble.
Right.
But take heart, I have overcome the world. And in our rush to avoid suffering, we also then avoid all the good that he wants to do.
Right.
And I think we're missing that. We're missing that depth, because we've all been there, right? We've all been through really hard things, and it's changed us because God's changed us. And he's done it for, like you taught me all those years ago, Holly, for his glory and our good. And that's something that I've carried with me for 22 years, is that very statement is for his good and for for his glory and our good, but also that he's not up there like a schoolmarm. Remember this from Bible study, waiting to get us. That's
Right.
not how it goes.
That's right.
It's just, he is either, like you said a minute ago, he's sovereign or he's not.
Right.
And he's got us or
That's
he
right.
doesn't. And we choose to believe that he does, even in excruciating pain.
And I think sometimes
Yeah.
pro-lifers are kind of pictured or by the folks who are for abortion as, well, you think you're perfect, you're preaching to me or whatever. And I think sometimes
Oh,
we all have to
gosh.
step back and go, no, we all mess up. We've all done all these things. And there are so many guidelines that God has given us. Hey, if you want to be blessed, do this. If you want to be blessed, do this. If you want to be blessed, trust me in this. And we all have our things that we're like, oh no, God, I got this part. And we don't catch the blessings either because we've made choices that are, just as bad, just as dumb, just as idiotic as some of the choices people make. So we're not saying we're
Oh, gosh,
perfect. We're just
no.
trying to say, hey, let's don't have this as a policy. Let's try to help people not do
That's
this because we're all thinking
That's right.
calmly right now and giving good advice.
That's right. That's exactly
That's
right.
right. And I would parlay on that, Scott, that I think that's the narrative that probably upsets me the most. I remember we were military at the time, walking into a big party after I had the baby, after I had Grace, and someone coming up to me saying, oh my gosh, I'm just so frightened that no one gave you good education on what your options were.
Oh,
And that has stuck with me for forever, because what it really means is that the narrative that's getting out is that those who don't think and have wisdom take the road of, keeping the baby and valuing the human life, and the Band-Aid, which truly is deeper and just wreaks havoc on a woman, is somehow the smarter. And so I just remember that thinking, wait a minute, this is 20 some years ago, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so you're so right that we've got to do both. And I tell that to my daughters. They say, well, what about the children that are in foster care? What about the young, women in poverty? What about, like, when we were in Ethiopia and we saw all the fistula clinics from women that were 12 and 13 having children? And I think, okay, these are not all the same, right? They're all human rights. We love them all. And so let's take them sequentially. Let's deal with them all, right? Education is important. Dealing with poverty, important. Foster care, important. And Christians should be in the middle. But it's not like abortion did anything for those entities. I mean, let's not let's
Right.
not kid ourselves. If we say let's do pro-choice and abortions everywhere, it's not like those areas are going away, right? I mean, and you would think they would, based on what the reporting you see.
right.
So I just think that, to parlay on what you said, Scott, I just think the narrative has to be that all these issues are good things to address, right?
Right.
And it's big. It's a stew. It's a big stew for sure. But the right heart towards it makes a big difference. So,
Wow. So any last thoughts as we wrap up today? And thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. But any parting wisdom as you've poured out so much on us
I thought
today?
you said partying. And I was like, I
No,
can't
that'll
party
be next time we
yet.
get together.
I'm not ready. And what are resources
yeah,
out there
party-
for, do you have an organization or some sort of way that parents in your position making these decisions can reach out?
Well, I think that, Amy Beth has said, I think we supported the Low Country, pregnancy center down when we were down in Charleston. And we really felt like it was really important that we showed that it was important. So, there was a couple women there who basically wanted to keep the babies, but they couldn't get a job because they didn't have a car. I mean, it came down to a car.
Wow.
And we walked in and we saw a woman in there, and she literally was teetering because she had no way to support because she couldn't get to her job.
Right.
And she had nothing else, no boyfriend, no family. And we were, saying, what can we do? And we were in the middle of getting rid of this Honda Accord because we had one too many children. So we were getting a swagger wagon. And the reality is, we recognize that it was we used it as a
Yeah.
tithe, you know, and that to us became then, so we gave the car. We gave the car, we were like, it was on our hearts. And I'm not saying that is the secret sauce, but what I am saying is that I think those are the things that will turn the tide in the narrative on us being, like you're saying, kind of perfect and uncaring, and we just say it, but we don't really do anything. And I think that's really important, not only for our children to see, but the people that we are saying life matters, to say, no, it really matters here. Okay, so a car, that's what you're needing. Okay, you know what? we're going to do something about that. We're going to get you a bus back. Okay, let's do something here.
Yeah.
We can do that. So I think those are really, Allison, I think that is the stuff that's the grassroots effort that really will change a community and change one life at a time.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Thank you, Holly. We appreciate your story, and whew, it was impactful. Absolutely.
I've only cried on one other.
No, that's you cry like
Oh, I
every
cried.
third
We cried.
show.
We
You
cried.
pretty
No.
well cry. We do.
We're all crying. Thank
Sweet.
you. I love you.
Well,
I will
Aw.
appreciate you coming.
Well, hey, I'm sorry I made y'all cry. The next show we're gonna do stories of Amy, Beth, and Holly, and those ones will be
Yes.
with laughter and
Spill it, Holly.
and possibly hee hawing and a snort coming out of Amy Beth's mouth. So,
I need some water.
Thank you so
spewing
much.
out of the laugh.
Any last
Thank
words
you,
from y'all?
good. Thank you so much, Holly.
In show notes, we will post resources for women. We've listed that. We've got several organizations, Charlotte Lozier. We have National Right to Life. We have Standing With You. We have several groups that are national that you can plug in locally, statewide, or nationwide if you want to be involved. But there are efforts exactly like Holly's described, and we want you to have them because we want you to see that we really are out there and it really is happening. And we would love for you to see it, use those if you need them, or join in the work if that's what you'd like to do.
Absolutely. Thank all of you.
Thank
very
you.
much. And thank you for watching
Thank you.
Alabama
Thank you so
Unfiltered.
much.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for being on. Thank you for watching Alabama Unfiltered this week. Please tell some other people about this program. Give us a thumbs up, 5 stars. Share it on your social media. This show is growing by leaps and bounds because of you and the 2 ladies that are over here. Thanks for watching. See y'all.